All right. Well, this is Infosec Decoded number 33, Mercurial chips. And we're starting with Irvin's stories because he has to rush away. So go ahead, Irvin.
That I do. I only have work to do. The first one that I have is Firefox has now added another thing to stand out against the wave of Chrome browsers. They're blocking cross-site tracking by default in private browsing. It's just another way that they're. I feel it's just another way they're trying to stand out.
I thought the whole point of private browsing was it blocked all that stuff anyway.
Well, apparently, even if you were in private browsing, it didn't block it. The sites were able to still cross-read the cookies.
Well,
but now that's not possible with Firefox.
Well, yeah. I don't understand why that wasn't there all along. Okay.
Right? That's one of those. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm glad it's there. The second one that I have is Kali Linux released another version. I installed it on a VM. It actually took me longer than I expected to install it because the VMware one doesn't work with the SXI.
Oh.
You have to, it's easier to start from scratch. And I think that's always the case with this.
Okay.
With Kali, to just trash your old one, install a new one. That way you don't have all the crazy bugs that comes from updating from one version to another.
Oh, yeah, I would never do that. Kali is buggy enough anyway.
Yeah, it seems to be working well. Nothing like explodes in front of me and that's like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. I like that they have tools, certain tools added, like Ghidra is now part of the box already.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, not bad. Cool. Of course, new desktop backgrounds, but meh.
Yeah, I got tired of Kali breaking things all the time, so I switched to just using plain Debian. But I'm not really doing red teaming anymore.
Mm-hmm. I use Debian more often, but kicks and giggles. Let's see what they have. It's all right.
Yeah, that's good.
This last article is one that I'm still understanding.
Half double.
Yeah, the rowhammer thing. So apparently Google has found that in RAM, if you hit a certain row within RAM, you can change those bits in that row, but it also affects other rows that are nearby it.
Right, that was rowhammer. I think
that was rowhammer. This is an expansion on that.
Like a million times, and there was some chance that it would affect some other bits or something.
Right, and the thing that they're realizing is if the effect is wider than they thought.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's rowhammer just expanded. That hey, there's more rows that can get affected when you hit a specific row a million times with zeros or ones.
Well, that would mean, I guess, that you could do something to violate the security policy, right?
Right.
Did they actually get a demonstration of it doing something exciting, like promoting you to administrator or something?
I haven't seen any of that yet. I think they're still working at a very small level.
Yeah.
But there is that potential that, okay, if we can affect one specific row and it affects the rows nearby, there's probably going to be an exploit coming out of, hey, we can do that kind of stuff now.
Yeah, this reminds me of the CISSP stuff where they talk about one of the desirable features of a security system is that one process cannot interfere with another. And they say that the way to really do this is an air gap where you have two separate systems, one for top secret and one for lesser privileges. And if you put them both on the same box, then you're pretty much compromising that isolation.
Right.
Yeah. All right. And then we got Alan's got, the one from the government. The government's going to do something about ransomware, apparently, or so they said.
It seems that the government's now taking ransomware seriously, unlike before, apparently.
Well, I think they're taking it more seriously. I mean, you can't deny it's being a national security problem lately.
Oh, no question about it. Yes. And so finally, the US government's treating ransomware on par with terrorism. And this is an exclusive report from Reuters. They're breaking this story that now there is internal guidance that's been sent out to US federal attorneys' offices around the country saying that if there are any ransomware investigations, that all of that information should be coordinated with a task force in Washington, D.C. So this is very much a procedural thing, an internal procedural thing for federal law enforcement. Nevertheless, that's the same kind of coordination that's seen with terrorism investigations. And so this is more than, rather than a big headline show-stopping change in policy, this is just more of a change in the way that investigations are handled. Nevertheless, it is indicative of the federal government's increasing emphasis on ransomware investigations.
Well, I mean, after 9/11, George Bush created the DHS, created a whole new government agency just for this. This doesn't seem to be doing that or even changing the mission of any government agency.
No. And from what I understand, there's still considerable infighting amongst different agencies and departments over who's responsible.
Right.
So,
And of course, the big issue, I think, has been that the NSA is the group of the government that can do something, but it's not authorized to act on private agencies, private companies.
mm-hmm.
My big question is, where's the jobs?
Well, yeah, that's a much more practical plan. I mean, and now they're going to tell people like share data, but I don't think they've actually resolved the reasons why you can't share data. Because I mean, that's the problem. Somebody gets hit by an attack and they can't really like tell other people what happened very much.
Right.
You know, you hear all these stories about a company receiving a call from a mysterious agent saying you've been hacked.
Yeah.
And then when they try to get more information, all they've been told is, well, perhaps there's this one host you should look at. But that's all the information they ever get from the federal authorities.
Mhm.
Well, I heard a podcast from a guy who was working at the NSA the first time like a civilian part of the government got hit. And he was on site trying to help them when like the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called him and said, you have to get out of there right away. Holy crap, we're violating the Constitution and everything by having the NSA help any civilian agency.
Mm.
That's like a military coup. That's like using the military on a civilian matter. And that requires like a declaration of martial law or something before you can do that. It's like Caesar crossing Rubicon. There's a huge legal problem there.
Nevertheless, that doesn't prevent the NSA from snooping on applications domestically. So I don't know what the problem is.
Well, the problem is they're not supposed to do that, and they have to find sleazy workarounds to get away with it. Parallel reconstruction. And,
right.
But to do something good, we have to declare martial law.
Well, you could argue that, spying on the old-fashioned terrorists is kind of good too, but the problem is J. Edgar Hoover using all the FBI surveillance to manipulate politics. That's what they're afraid will happen again. It's as if you didn't trust your government and your spy agencies to be doing good stuff all the time. Anyway, we'll see what comes of this but it seems to me like in the short run, nobody really knows what this means yet. Anyway, then I've got the one I found, Mercurial, which is kind of fun. Google noticed when you run a fleet of like 10,000 servers, some of them make mistakes in the computation. And like if you encrypt data, some of that data gets garbled and you can't decrypt it. But then they found out if you decrypt it on the same processor core that encrypted it, it works. Because what's happening is it's not random. Some processor cores in manufacturing are defective. So they do the wrong operation on the bits. And that is not picked up in quality control. And this has been the way chips have been made forever. You have a die, you make like 10,000 chips on the die, then you test them and throw away the percentage of them that are defective and you sell the rest. And the problem is the processors are so complicated, your tests don't really pick up all the flaws anymore. So some of those processors you ship as okay are not really okay. Some of the instructions work wrong. And you won't notice, especially since most compilers don't really use all the assembly language instructions anyway, the C language instructions. So you'll be fine, but when you like make a update to the code and the compile uses the bad instruction, now certain cores will start having flaws again. So they call that Mercurial cores, and they're developing tools to like more quickly identify the Mercurial cores and like route traffic around them or something. But they say this is the fundamental cause of this is moving to these smaller and smaller scale chips where you have more and more fundamental flaws in the making. And that's why I was sort of amazed, like last week when Kaitlyn had 1 nanometer scale chips. I'm like, that sounds terrible. Anyway, so they at least discovered it's a real thing. It's not like random cosmic rays or thermal errors or something. And we'll see what comes of it all. But I thought it was a very fun defect.
My understanding is that the major CPU manufacturers know with a reasonably high degree of certainty which of their units, which of their processors have defects and the character of those defects. And so from any given batch, they know they've got some CPUs that are underperforming but are still functional. And rather than just trashing those, they'll actually brand those as a lower grade CPU. So rather than being, say, an Intel i9, it's downgraded to an Intel i3, and it still works, and they go ahead and sell it.
Well, that makes sense as long as there's a brand definition. I mean, that's the way resistors have always been. That's where the whole color stripes on resistors always was. You'd make resistors and test them, and the ones that are really good get gold, and the ones that fail the first test get silver, and the ones that fail both tests get the blank, and you know that they're like going to be 20% wrong.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that was the plan. Gold was the ones that are really good, and the silver is the rejects, and blank is the rejects of that. And they're cheaper. But it makes, I mean, this would mean, but presumably Google is buying the best stuff, and they're finding even that has defects. I think that's the point. Anyway, yeah, but I mean, I think it would be really fine if you could label it. But anyway, so that's Mercurial chips. And then Alan's got cybercrime statute. Oh, the CFAA. What is going on with the CFAA?
Yeah, the blockbuster ruling from the Supreme Court just yesterday. They have narrowed the scope of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the CFAA, pretty significantly in a case called VanBuren versus the United States. VanBuren was a police officer in Louisiana, I believe, who got busted for working with an informant, not on an investigation, but an informant who had met a woman at a bar and wanted to get her license plate number, and approached this cop and offered to pay VanBuren, the cop, pay him to perform a search.
Well, probably find out an address for a license plate number, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, this is great. I saw this woman leaving the bar. I want you to find her home address so I can stalk her.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, really
doing.
criminal action on the part of this police officer, because not only did he perform a search that he should not have for a party who had no business knowing, but he also received payment for it. And he was convicted, rightly, but he was convicted based on CFAA.
That hardly seems like the biggest crime here.
Yeah, right. And I don't know, maybe he's still on the hook for other crimes.
Yeah.
But at any rate,
I would think like bribery or like,
yeah, right, like bribery.
Duty or something would be the crime. I mean, the computer part of it seems quite incidental.
Well, if there's anything we've learned from the past 4 years, it's that bribery doesn't matter, apparently, in this country. People don't really care much about it. Well. And so this case went all the way to the Supreme Court because of the in this case, the application of the CFAA. And the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 opinion that the CFAA has been applied inappropriately, that it's been overly broad, and that VanBuren should not have been convicted based on this interpretation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And the particular provision of the statute is, quote, to access a computer with authorization and to use such access to obtain information in the computer that the accessor is not entitled so to obtain. And
but this was exactly the issue with the San Francisco network administrator. And, the guy who prosecuted that case comes and gives guest lectures in my class. I mean, he was real proud of the fact that he was able to communicate to the jury that even a person authorized to administer a system, there are still certain things they're not allowed to do. And if they do that, they're still exceeding their authorization. And apparently that argument did not succeed at the Supreme Court.
No, it did not. And so in their ruling, the court said that the plaintiff had been convicted under, quote, covers those who obtain information from particular areas in the computer, such as files, folders, or databases, to which their computer access does not extend. It does not cover those who, like the petitioner, VanBuren, have improper motives for obtaining information that is otherwise available to them. So this is the distinction that the Supreme Court is now making, is that maybe his motives were bad. Clearly they were bad, but he did have access.
Yeah.
And that was not improper access. He was, as a police officer, fully empowered to have access to records such as license plate numbers and addresses.
Well, I can kind of see that because the CFA does not say anything about intent. This is something the security researchers have been trying to put in there all along. And they've said, oh, no, we don't care about intent because we'll never be able to prove that. So it kind of makes sense to say the CFA as written only covers exceeding the access you have.
Yes.
And nothing about whether your intent is good or evil.
Yes, yes.
So you can still prosecute him for those other crimes that do involve intent, like bribery.
Right, right. And also a number of organizations such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation were very adamant that the VanBuren case was applying the CFAA inappropriately. So,
okay.
This is exactly the kind of case that legal types love, in that the underlying crime was a crime, but this was an misapplication of the law fundamentally.
Yeah, and of course, the thing that interests me, and I think everybody in security, is what about white hatters like me that will find a vulnerability and tell them, and then they accuse you of doing something bad. The CFAA is a big issue for security researchers.
Right, right. Or even something like just performing scans, network scans, Nmap scans, which certain individuals have been hauled off to court for in the past. Now, I think this gives them cover.
Yeah, that's good. I guess it's probably good for security researchers anyway.
Yes, it's progress.
Well, that's rare that we find legal progress for security researchers. Right. Anyway, this one here, Google has a new tool that will find all the dependencies for open source projects. And it is amazing. Somebody brought up the page it produces for Docker, and there are like thousands of dependencies. And so it gives you a nice little map. And the map shows you, there's something called GUI they use as a demonstration, and the map shows its dozens of dependencies, and it even has clear vulnerabilities. It tells you if one of the dependencies has a buffer overflow or a format string vulnerability. So this is the beginning of dealing with supply chain management. And remember, we heard a couple of weeks ago about how a government agency tried to use curl. And then under these new rules, they said, well, what are the dependencies of curl? And they contacted the author of curl and said, you have to submit a bill of materials saying all the dependencies of your product. And he's like, I'm in another country, just an open source developer. Why do I need to fill out this stupid form for the US government? But we're all going there.
So that tool is better than like the OWASP one, and didn't GitHub have one too?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how it compares to those. You might be, but I mean, it's certainly, this topic is very hot right now because of SolarWinds. And I think it's like many security issues. The dirty secret is everybody is pretty much wide open because you depend on 20 things, and each one of them depends on 20 things, and not all that stuff has been patched. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a big issue these days to try to somehow control these supply chain vulnerabilities, and we're just in the infancy of it. Anyway, Alan's got FireEye being sold, which sounds pretty important.
Yeah, a little bit of news from the security business world. FireEye is selling FireEye. In 2014, FireEye, which is a security appliance company and now cloud security company, bought Mandiant. And Mandiant was mostly a threat intelligence and investigation firm.
Yep.
And that was a big acquisition back in, I think it was 2014. I think it was about a $1.3 billion sale. In the years since, Mandiant, of course, or I should say FireEye, the combined FireEye and Mandiant's gotten a lot of press for being really on the cutting edge of investigations, incident response.
Oh yeah.
Getting hired by the government, hired by large corporations after breaches, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'd always thought, well, this company must be doing really well. This is a very prominent, respected cybersecurity firm. But as it turns out, the business hasn't been doing that well at all.
Oh.
FireEye appliances have been declining in popularity. Sales have been going down. And the whole security appliance business, the business of selling boxes that your customers install on racks, really isn't so strong anymore with the transition to cloud. And I guess the company, FireEye, realized this and decided to sell off their entire FireEye division, all of their security appliances, all of their cloud security solutions, et cetera, et cetera. That's getting sold off to Symphony Technology Group, which is a private equity firm in Silicon Valley that's on a buying spree. They bought RSA, they bought McAfee, and now they're buying FireEye, and they're probably going to roll all these three into just one big agglomeration that will not do very well and will eventually fail, as these things tend to go.
Yep.
Meanwhile, the Mandiant portion of the business is doing well, and the whole company, FireEye Mandiant, has been run by the former CEO of Mandiant, a fellow by the name of Kevin Mandia.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's basically selling off the company that bought his company, and now he's running his own original company as an independent entity all over again.
Yeah, this is, well, it kind of makes sense to me. I was surprised when FireEye bought Mandiant, because Mandiant is great, and I have a lot to do with them because they write textbooks teaching people incident response, and they're very good textbooks. I have, I think, 3 courses now based on Mandiant products. But FireEye has these expensive enterprise things I don't have any free trial, and so I can never test them or use them in my classes. And my friends in corporations mostly whine and complain and say that stuff is very annoying, doesn't work very well. So.
Yeah, and I understand that they're extremely expensive too. Like the licensing agreements have a habit of changing the prices dramatically year to year.
Yeah, I hear a lot of complaints. I mean, I can't test it myself, but the Mandiant stuff is very good. They seem to have basically invented the field of instant response and published books to train us, which I really appreciate. So anyway, I'm sort of glad to see them cut FireEye loose. I think that selling box stuff is kind of over because of the cloud.
Right. I think people in the security industry, based on my perusal of Twitter, all seem to agree that this was a good thing and a necessary thing, and that Mandiant can get back to doing what it does well, which is essentially be a services company plus some software products, and they can just unload this FireEye component that's a declining business anyway. Yeah,
this is a crazy business. Companies sink underneath you. We're like polar bears jumping from one ice floe to another in this business.
Yeah.
Colleges sink underneath you too. It's a crazy time.
Colleges especially.
Yeah, well, no, I think colleges last longer than private companies, like startups, but none of them last very long. A couple generations ago, you'd join a company like Kodak and you'd stay there for 40 years and get a gold watch and retire. Mm-hmm. And we're very, very far from that. Yeah. Anyway, there's a fun thread on Twitter of the lifetime of a ransomware incident that I thought was wonderful from Kevin Beaumont. So you get hit by ransomware, then you just leave your store from backup. But then, of course, nobody knows how to restore from backup because your Active Directory is down. And then if he hits the domain controllers, then none of your monitoring works. And on it goes, then you don't know what to tell people, and legal wants to vet all the statements. Then you try to rebuild the laptops, but your build servers are hit. And if they haven't been hit, they're in 17 countries. And working from slow network connections. And it's very interesting, because I remember I had the same feeling. I was about a year ago, I was like being snarky about people get hit with ransomware. And then I thought, what if I got hit with ransomware? My stuff is not on one server anymore. My stuff is sprawled across like 5 cloud services. I don't really have good backups of it all. The fact is, I'm no different than anybody else. I would look like a fool. I don't have a restoration plan that could quickly restore all that stuff, not anything close to it. It's not easy. Anyway, it's an instructive thread for people who haven't actually been through a ransomware incident to help appreciate what I think everybody in the country is now asking, like with the oil hack and the meat hack. Wait a minute, you guys aren't ready for this? How come everything goes to hell just when you click on the wrong link? And it points out how fragile our industry base is.
Yeah, this is a very amusing thread from Kevin Beaumont, who's always good for amusing threads, it should be pointed out. I was just reading that, and I forget what the company was. Was it Exabeam? One of those top security company or backup solution companies just got hacked by ransomware gang. And
that would be great. You go for your backups and they're down too.
Yeah, but not just the backups, but the backup company got hacked.
Yeah.
And they've been staking their reputation on providing backups that allow you to recover from a ransomware attack. And now they've been ransomed and they can't restore from their very own backup. So I'll have to do a story on this on our next call. But
yeah,
if even the backup companies can't do backups right, then there really is no hope for anyone.
Yeah, well, I think that's the issue. Nicole Perlroth wrote her book saying, this is how they tell me the world ends. And, I can see how you could get an attitude,
Yeah.
If we depend on this technology so much and it is so very far from as reliable as we need it to be.
Yeah, there's a certain fatalism that I think is creeping in right now. That people are realizing that ransomware cannot be solved through technological means alone, and that you're not going to be able to stop the attacks, and at least not against the skilled attackers, and you may or may not be able to effectively restore from those attacks. And even if you can recover from those attacks without paying the ransom, that recovery might be much lengthier and far more expensive than if you just paid for the ransom in the first place. And I think this is what the city government of Atlanta discovered after they got ransomed. I think the ransom demand was only $50,000 or something like that, but they decided to take the high road. Good for them. And the recovery cost them over $2 million and many, many months of downtime.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. Everybody just pays the ransom. I was just seeing people are trying, and the insurance companies are beginning to try to get out of the business of providing ransomware insurance because the cost keeps going up. And various governments across the world are trying to outlaw paying the ransom, but that's really not practical.
It's not realistic. If it's a hospital, for example, that's been hit with ransomware, their records might be a matter of life and death. And so
yeah,
there is some incentive there to just pay the ransom and get it over with.
That's why, I think Biden's latest plan is maybe we should get into law enforcement and actually just punish the criminals that way. That might be a way to hold this down. But we're certainly struggling right now.
Yeah, well, if the government is making good on this movement towards treating ransomware as terrorism, then maybe there can be some effective mobilization. Although
yeah, it's
the last time there was a major response to a terrorist incident in the U.S., that did not go so well.
No, and another big thing I see a lot of people saying is, well, we just have to get rid of Bitcoin and that will end ransomware. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'm not, a lot of people, serious people are saying that would solve the problem. Bitcoin is useless anyway. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure it's easy to stop Bitcoin. I'm not sure it's really a good idea. I would like to see some financial regulations on investments in cryptocurrency just because of the disastrous losses people suffer.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, people are considering all these drastic solutions.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get worse. There was, by the way, a very interesting article in the New Yorker magazine about ransomware and kind of a profile of a fellow who's a ransomware negotiator.
Yeah.
And also interviewed in this article were a number of people involved in physical hostage negotiations. And there's an interesting summary there about the kidnapping trends that were happening, in particular in South America in the 1970s and 1980s, targeting corporate executives.
Yeah, isn't that still going on in Mexico? I thought it was.
And it still does happen in certain places. Yes, absolutely. Though we don't hear very much about it. And what ended up happening there in that world is that the kidnappers and the corporations have come to a certain understanding that the kidnapping will happen, the kidnappers will get paid, and then everything will get swept under the rug. And so they've arrived at a certain stasis. And so everyone knows the rules of the game and nobody gets hurt, at least physically.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting killed.
Yeah, well, this is what Ronald Reagan said. He said, organized crime is better than disorganized crime. When you make a deal with them, you get it under control that way. And that's,
I think that'll work. That'll work. And the ransomware, that will work.
That seems to be the current
goal
situation.
In the future. The goal in the future is to increase the level of difficulty so that you limit the number of attackers out there. But inevitably, a few attacks will get through. And when that happens, then the target, the victim, will just have to pay the money. And it will have to be a fair amount of money, too. It won't be $50,000. It will be $5 million or $20 million or whatever.
Yeah. Well, this is what I've been told, is that incident response firms, one of the services, the high value services they offer is threat intelligence. They will know the reputation of the group that ransomed you, and they will know whether it's worth paying them or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so just like above ground companies, they have to maintain good customer relations and, have a trouble ticket place where you can call in and complain, hey, I paid for the ransomware decryptor and it's not working. I need like the help desk. And they have all that because they just have to maintain a good reputation or they won't get their money.
Right. Yeah. It's just a business transaction like any other.
It is. Well, I think that's where we're going. It's sort of a crazy world. My friend who's 98 used to drive a taxi cab in San Francisco in the 40s told me that's how the whole government worked back then. Everything was corrupt top to bottom. You just knew who to pay off. You'd eat at a cafe, you'd talk to the cops, you'd find out who do I have to pay to get like a business license or a permit to buy a house. You'd bribe the right guy and it worked. He said, it was totally corrupt, but it worked.
Oh, the good old days.
Well, we're still in those good old days, it seems.
Yeah, well, I guess we haven't left those days behind after all.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson of the last several years in America. We all thought it couldn't happen here, but the fact is we're just like every other nation.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, well, I guess that's it for this one, and we'll be back at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. We're moving to Tuesday and Friday.
Sounds good.
Okay.
See everybody then.
All right.